Together, thanks to BPL, you can sew the costumes. All right, so let me invite my guests to come out and take the stage. So I can't remember if I mentioned my name. My name is Meredith Walters, and I legit work at the library. I didn't just grab a microphone and hop up here. I work the BPL Presents department, and since last spring, we've been on this amazing journey, along with Google Arts and Culture, around a project called Mali Magic. It's an online platform that you should all go and see. And one of the things that's amazing about it is, pardon me, Mali and Timbuktu, and it was a center of religious scholarship, in algebra, philosophy. You can see all of these manuscripts that were, or a good portion of these manuscripts that were from Mali that became endangered when Islamic extremists came through in 2012. And a badass librarian of Timbuktu, as he's known, Abdel Haidara, and a small cohort of colleagues, like 5 people, went around the country and got manuscripts from libraries, from personal archives, got them out of harm's way, and scanned them. And so now on this digital platform, Mali Magic, you can see these ancient manuscripts translated into English, French, and Spanish. And it's an enormous resource. It's a beautiful repository of knowledge, which in the library game means a lot to us, as you well know. I hope you are all library card holders. But so this project really resonated with us. So we had Dr. Haidara here. We had conversations with colleagues around the country on the importance of archives and how sometimes there are deafening silences in archives. So just the importance of archiving material. And we've gone over the manuscripts, touched a little bit on monuments over the course of our several programs, and here we're talking about music tonight with 3 really terrific guests. And before I go any further, I want to thank the Tripp and Shapiro Foundations, without whom we would not be able to have done any of this fantastic related programming, and we wouldn't be able to get those albums for you. So thank you very much to our supporters there. But let me introduce you to our guests tonight. Maureen Mann is a cultural anthropologist whose research interests include African American music and culture. She is the author of Black Diamond Queens, African American Women and Rock and Roll, and also Right to Rock, the Black Rock Coalition and the Cultural Politics of Race. Right here we have, you can applaud for Maureen. Yacouba Sissoko is a kora player and a jelly from a well-known jelly family in Kita, Mali. He is in high demand as a soloist, as a guest artist and collaborator. He's performed with Baba Mal, Harry Belafonte, Paul Simon, Leroy Jenkins. That impressed me. Yeah. Regina Carter and others. And his ensemble, Sia, will say it. That's not how you say it. Is that right?
Yes, Sia.
It sounds like saying, see ya. But no, come here on November 13th at 4 p.m. and you will see Sia, his beautiful ensemble. So please join us for that. And finally, we have Paul D. Miller, DJ Spooky. He is a composer, a multimedia artist, and a writer whose work immerses audiences in a blend of genres, cultures, and environmental and social issues. He has collaborated as well with an array of artists, including Yoko Ono, Chuck D, Metallica, and Steve Reich. Yeah. So you're in very good hands, and I leave it to you, Maureen.
Thank you. Can you all hear me? All right. Talk right into it? Is that working now? Okay, yeah, I have a quiet voice, I'm told. So good evening. Good evening. Good evening. All right. I wanted to do that very quick call and response exercise because we're talking about, among other things, African continuities in the United States. And call and response is such an important feature in West African musics and also in African American musical practices. So I thought that would be a way to start, as well as a way to greet everyone. And I want to thank Meredith for inviting me to participate in this conversation. I think we're going to have a really good time and a really wide-ranging time as we talk about moving from Bamako to Brooklyn. So when I was preparing for this musical discussion with those B's, Bamako, the capital of Mali, and Brooklyn, our hometown, I started to think of some other relevant musical words that start with B. And one of them, the first one was banjo, which I think most people in the US probably think of as an instrument associated with country music and bluegrass. But the banjo, the American banjo, is a descendant of West African musical instruments, West African stringed instruments, like the ngoni, the konting, and the kora. And so tonight we'll have a really nice conversation and listening to about a conversation about and listening to the kora. So I wanted to flag that because the West African people who were brought here through the Middle Passage and enslaved brought ideas and information with them. It's always important to remember that. And one of the things they brought was their memory of these stringed instruments. And then they reproduced them, they recreated them here. And over time, those stringed instruments became what we now know as the American banjo. The other relevant B word that I was thinking about is one that you might have been thinking about coming into this room, which is the blues. And thinking about blues music, a tradition of solo singing of African Americans, sometimes accompanied by an instrument. But solo singing and storytelling is something that was practiced in West Africa, and another form that was brought to the US, and something that shifted and changed over time and informed jazz, rhythm and blues, gospel, soul, rock and roll, rap, on and on and on. So that these musical practices that started in the heart of West Africa are with us and very present here in the US, and of course go around the world as all kinds of different kinds of musical genres. So we'll be exploring that tonight with two people who have done so much innovative work around these kinds of connections and exchanges. So I think we want to show, I think, Paul, you have a clip and you want to say something about it before you, yeah. I'll turn things over to you.
Okay, so first and foremost, what a treat and pleasure, Yacouba and Marine. Can I just say these guys are amazing? If we can just give them a little bit of a shout. Okay, so with that said and done, I want to kind of preface what you're about to see and hear from the viewpoint. It's funny, Google really wants me to explore, and I'm trying to say I don't. All right, it's just not happening. Okay, so given aside our corporate overlords from the world of the data farms of the future. Okay, so let's unpack a couple of issues, and I'd like to play a quick video. First and foremost, I wanted to just mute. I have my iPad, which I'm going to be doing something later. But can you mute this? Because I'm going to plug the headphones jack into the laptop, just so that's okay. You ready? It just kind of maybe. Okay, here we go. Hopefully, it's not a huge noise. There we go. Okay, rock and roll, as they say. All right. So here we are in 2022. What I'd like to kind of preface this video is that I was artist in residence and still have a pretty wonderful and robust relationship with Google's Cultural Foundation. Now, what is Google's Cultural Foundation, you may ask? Well, Google, over the years, has tried to kind of create a situation where they're funding the arts from the viewpoint of data aesthetics. And they approached me to be artist in residence a while ago. Much of my work is at the intersection of art, technology, and this kind of willful sense of playfulness and irreverence towards the categories that we use to define African American culture. Now, regretfully, half the battle these days is that technology is viewed as neutral. Personally, I think that technology is ideologically highly charged. And I think that, for example, the instrument that Yacouba is playing is a highly charged ideological artifact, from the idea of tuning systems on over to the materials, on over to the way that we think about everything from tempo, key, and pitch. Now, all of that is tied to the way that African American diaspora has come out of this sort of forge of the Middle Passage. So I want to just play a quick video clip of what the project was, and this will give you a sense of what we're talking about here. Hopefully the sound, this is not my laptop, so these days Apple always adds more and more things that you don't need. Okay, so hopefully this won't be too loud, but here we go. Timbuktu is a city steeped in legends. It's a city that has been a regional powerhouse over the last several centuries, and above all, its legacy as a myth as one of the most remote cities in Africa that endures in the form of the libraries at the edge of a desert. The books that you would find were all artifacts that show resilience, where Timbuktu, a center of Islamic and indigenous civilization, survived over the last 500 years. Every bit of the libraries represents infinite knowledge and potential. So when I was commissioned with Google, what we ended up working on was a series of sort of the ideas of rhythm science. Most of my books are with MIT Press, and I'm artist in residence at Yale for the next year and some change. So essentially, I'm fascinated with rhythm and science. In fact, my first book is called Rhythm Science. So MIT and Yale have been very supportive of my work, so has Google. Each of those is radically different ecosystems, and I'm actually very much, they're problematic at many levels. One could argue Yale, for example, is a huge hedge fund with a small school attached to it. But guess what? Most of the American schools, like Georgetown, for example, Brown University was one of the largest slave owners, Duke University, and so on. We are now unpacking the legacy of how alienation and labor, the African slave, generated the wealth of the American system. So, but never was given over to being a stakeholder in that wealth. So how do we in the 21st century do a retrospective and recalibrate how we think about the notion of capital and cultural capital, especially in an era where we are in this kind of, you have some of the wealthiest people in the world, like Elon Musk, for better or for worse, running around with satellites. So one last little thing I just want to show, and then I'll pass the mic back over, is generally one of the wealthiest people in the history of humanity is Mansa Musa. If you're not familiar with his work, for example, adjusted for inflation, because we're now in a recession, he's generally considered to be literally one of the wealthiest human beings in history. But his wealth led to this wild diaspora, where he went literally celebrating across the Sahel Desert with a huge pageantry with gold, with a pageant that would stretch for hundreds of miles of people singing and dancing, and he was throwing gold. I mean, it's just totally a wild kind of thing, but it left the legacy of this kingdom in Africa that many Europeans began searching for, the kingdom of gold. And I'll leave that because we're going to circle back to that. But I do want to just say, again, adjusted for inflation, more wealth than someone like Alexander the Great, more wealth than Caesar, more wealth than probably Putin. At this point, Putin's considered, the hidden wealth of Ukraine and all of our tax dollars, by the way. And anyone who, uses oil, regretfully. So when you start to think about Mansa Musa as this legacy of one of the wealthiest people in human history, these are things that I think hang over the conversation of the diaspora. And we'll unpack some of this later, but I do want to be respectful of everybody's time. So back to you.
Okay, thank you. I want to just start by talking about the connections that the two of you have to Mali and Malian music, and I wanted to start with Yacouba. If you could tell us, when we look at your website, you're described as a master kora player. So if you could tell us, how did you become a master kora player, and talk a little bit about your family and the tradition that you are a part of.
Thank you so much, Maureen. But I want to tell you, be careful. You cannot ask Jelly Griot to talk because you're going to be all night. I won't stop. If you feel like I'm talking too much, say, hey, okay, that's it. Thank you. By the way, I'm so happy to see my country. I miss back home and seeing Timbuktu, the mosque, all the houses built by hand. It's amazing to see. My name is Yacouba Sissoko from Mali in West Africa. I know you know already about Mali. I was born in a very beautiful little town in Mali, in the west, 3 hours drive from the capital, Bamako, my town. It's called Kita. And I was born into a very powerful musical family that they call Jelly family. I was blessed to have a grandparent who raised me. They were so good in every level. My grandmother was a great singer. My grandfather, a master kora player. My mother, who was like a leader, singer in ensemble instrumental of Mali and was in demand, who I saw singing in North Korean language, and she didn't even go to school. The former president, whose our grandson is the president now in North Korea, Kim Il-sung was his grandfather, who was a friend with my mother. Used to invite my mother every year for the independence celebration, and they will send a Korean singer to teach my mom for 2 weeks how to sing in Korean. And I saw her singing in Korean. I didn't recognize my own mother. I'm like, this is not Bambara. So you're singing in another language. But so they used to call my mother stereo. Because if you sing in any language, my mom will hear, she will repeat, and no accent. She will sing exactly the way you did. So that's my mother. And I was born into that family. And as a baby, my connection started. Before I even turned like 1 year, I used to crawl and come grab a kora while my grandfather would play kora. And like I had a love for this instrument before even I walked. The kora helped me to make my first step. So I used to grab a kora and get up and look at my grandfather playing kora. And we have this kind of prophecy spiritually. My grandfather was very powerful, and he looked at me as a baby and told my mom, he said, the whole world will discover him. They will know him. He will replace me with this instrument. And don't pressure him. He will get there. So my mom told me, but because when he told my mom I was a baby, I couldn't remember. So, but it's my family was full of culture, history, music, and singing. You didn't even have to be obligated. You will fall in love with any of those that you want, and you can learn, because it was a huge school, my family. So you don't have to pay for your class. You can practice every day, anytime you want. But my connection with the Sakura was very special, because in other Jelly family, they will push you, force you to play, to practice. No one told me, any day you have to play. You have to practice, because I will take a kora and play whatever I want. Before even my grandfather giving me the pattern notes, okay, this is what you're supposed to. So I used to play with the kora and sleep. They will remove a kora when I fall asleep, put the kora away, and when I woke up, the first thing I would start looking for was its kora. And then at the age of 9, I really, really focus on the Kora. But I grew up listening to Western music. I never listened to the music from my own country. And that was a weird to some people, but I think I had some gifts into me, the love of music, not just Malian music, but the music in general. But every time I would see my grandfather playing kora, I will say to myself, you know what, I have to do this. This will make me independent, will make me the person I want to be tomorrow. And I asked my grandfather, I said, you know what, I'm ready now for the kora. And because Jali people, we are so special in the Manding society. To tell you a little bit about the Jali, because some people hear about Jali or griot in French. In English, we are living history books, but they don't know what we do in reality. Jali, our job is to bring people together, make peace, and make people loving each other, make people supporting each other with no discrimination. We have to stand with all the president, or even before the president in our country. My ancestors used to go and talk to the king if a king is wrong. Doesn't matter you have a power, but Geli will never be afraid of anybody. Will tell you the truth. And if you know your background, you know your family history, you will never resist with the Jali. You cannot say no to us. We'll bring people, noble family, to get married. I even did it at the age of 12. I got the people married. That's what I learned in my family, and they marry until now. And when I see them, I'm like, yeah, I'm proud of myself because so it's important to follow because I got the transfer of all those knowledge from grandparents to me straight. Not from my parent, but from my grandparent, and they're not alive. They left me so early. When I was qualified as a master, after only 3 years practicing Kora, my grandfather passed away. So, but it was good for me to spend a lot of time near my grandfather to learn every single thing. Anything I wanted to know, I will ask him. Sometimes he will be a little bit, oh, you ask too much question. I'm like, yeah, I want to know because, you know, this is when I really have a love and I'm focused, I'm much open because I'm going to school. But if I also go to like a college, university, I won't have much time to focus on those. But I want to get them before I progress in the school, in the study. And he understood that. And he said, okay, that's good. Then we're giving you everything. He and my grandmother. So to learn how like each noble family means, where they come from, who they are, what their ancestor did, that's a part of our job. To tell noble family to be good. And if we see any family member from any good family doing something bad, we have to call them. Hey, don't do this. This doesn't look like you. Your family used to be a king family, or your family used to be some, magical or power, peaceful family. So if you do bad thing, then that can change your family image. Or you want to become a good person, we have to encourage you to not give up. And which is what I do here when I work with the university, everywhere. I have to encourage a student because that's a jolly job. So we have a lot, so many roles that we play. But back to the Kora, I focused on the Kora when I was 9. I learned at the age of 9, and at the age of 12, my grandfather told me, wow, now you can even beat me playing on the Kora, so I can call you a master. You are good to go. And I started touring professionally at the age of 15. Until now, I didn't need no one financially to help me because of this. And something funny, I wanted to go to musical school in my country, National Institute of Art. I went there. It took only, I studied for 6 months, that's it. And at the university, you're supposed to go over 2 years to get your diploma. But I was so much in demand, and I used to go on tour and have some cash in my, I'm like, wow, I can't believe this. So I said to myself, why I want to continue study to get the diploma when I'm getting, a couple of $1,000 on my own now with Cora. Even my father said to me, I'm serving the country, because my father was a diplomat. He said, if I never been to France, you touring the world, you calling me from America, from Japan, from China, from everywhere, and I don't even know. Only if I go to the map to see where are those countries. So I'm proud of you. You are doing better. And I support my entire family until all my parents passed away because of this. And now I'm meeting all great people in America. And also, I didn't learn kora because I wanted to play kora, but I wanted to play Malian traditional music and also Western music. That's why I came to America for cultural exchange, to introduce this to jazz, Latin, R&B, pop music, everything. But blues is from my country, as you know. So, which is working perfectly. Like you already heard who I work already with, Harry Belafonte, Paul Simon, even Lauryn Hill, and Regina Carter, Leroy John King, the great violinist. So this is a kora. We're gonna talk more. I told you, if you don't stop me, I will be all night. So let me also tell you.
I'm going to try to stop you,
Okay, see?
but I'm going to come back to you. I want to bring Paul in and ask you a similar question, just about your musical path and how it led you to Mali and to Malian music.
Okay, so let's get nonlinear. Before I jump into that, Yacouba, could you, just from the conversation you were just talking about, lineage, history, remember you were going to play a little bit? Can you let's get the audience some music for a second. Like
Do you want to hear that, right? All right.
But don't go crazy long, but just like a.
Thank you, brother. I love that, because if you don't tell me, I will, I don't.
Just give them a taste.
All right, thank you.
Okay, so that's a hard act to follow. So
Can I
what-
just ask
oh,
one
okay.
quick question of Yacouba? Could you just tell us what you just sang? What those words meant?
The song, Dandula, it means simply like every good thing will end. But make sure you enjoy those moments. Don't regret for living your life. It means that.
Okay. Okay, so if we can just call up the laptop, I just was going to show a quick couple of images. So basically, I'm just totally deeply respectful of what Yacouba is up to. I come out of a radically different context. So I just want to show you guys a couple of quick photos. This is basically I worked. A good friend of mine was basically, if you think about the history of African American cinema and all sorts of issues. Melvin Van Peebles was a family friend, and my mom was a historian of design. I always enjoy showing. Basically, the way he comes out of talking about his family. My father was dean of Howard University's law school, and my mother was a historian of design. So both parents were professors, and I grew up in a household that deeply valued art and thinking about global culture. So we would generally have, I grew up near DuPont Circle in Washington, D.C. I don't know if anybody knows that area, but, oh, okay. So we owned our own business, and our family, I grew up, if you've ever been to D.C., there's a restaurant called Teaism. I don't know if anybody knows that. That's literally my family's old building. So you've had dinner in my living room, basically. I told my mom not to get rid of that building. But basically, her book called Threads of Time, 500 Years of African American Women Designers, supported the idea of African American women and looking at design from a viewpoint of globalization. And one could argue, in fact, and I do argue, that fashion, design, and diaspora, the triple D, kind of really go together in how we think about the exchange of cultures globally. And here we are in the era of late capital, and one could argue, as we move further into a data-driven society, that information and history becomes far more important. In fact, one could argue the war in Ukraine is being fought over a fiction. Where Putin is saying that Ukraine is run by Nazis, even though it's a Jewish person who's really the president. Again, it's Putin here. Putin and Trump should just be put on a small island someplace. So my family history, much in a parallel to what Yacouba was talking about, I come out of a tradition where we dealt with information and history and the legacy of how people thought about improvisation with history. So my mom, we used to have poetry readings, historical, just all sorts of stuff. Her book Threads of Time is widely available, and basically she was friends with people, all sorts of people like Angela Davis. My dad was Angela Davis's lawyer, et cetera. But I also do stuff like I go to very remote places like Antarctica, and I took a series of studio projects to Antarctica and did a series of initiatives around climate change and data based on Afro-diasporic music. So here we are, and the climate crisis is radically redefining global geopolitics, and above all, that notion of 4/4 tempo and how we think about the tuning systems of our time, that informs a lot of my thinking. So let's just go back to another quick thing here. So The Badass Librarians of Timbuktu was a book basically that kind of follows the librarian Abdel Kader, who basically helped guard the legacy of these libraries that were being basically burned and destroyed by fundamentalists. And the fundamentalists felt that because there was indigenous culture, pre-Islamic, that they needed to burn it or destroy it. So these incredible buildings, incredible archives, and people were being executed, libraries being burned. So they figured out a way to store the knowledge. So too with African American. One could argue that the culture was an inheritance of a legacy of genocide and destruction. So the ongoing situation in the Sahel, which I was showing you some images earlier, is basically a kind of cultural genocide, one could argue. Now, what does that have to do with contemporary here, us sitting in Brooklyn? Here we go. So when you start to think about Brooklyn and America, one of my favorite things to kind of riff on is a book by Hans Sloane. And he's generally considered to be one of the first people to really document the Kora in West African and American context. He literally wrote a book called Passage to Jamaica, and he actually documented all sorts of really pretty cool histories and documented in a way that was notated and was able to kind of document how the Afro diaspora in a book was able to have a consistent musical expression across cultures. Now, this book is written in the late 17th century, around 1688. So you have to imagine, for him to do that was pretty shocking, and I'll just show you really quickly. Again, this isn't my laptop, so excuse me if I hope I'm not gonna pop open somebody's, okay. Stuff here. All right, 1 second. And, okay. So this is generally considered one of the first images of the Kora in Western literature. And what he ended up doing was doing drawings. So you can see the instrument that Yacouba is playing, and then look back almost 400 years, and you can see a continuity. Now, what's incredible about this is that the banjo, the guitar, and then from the guitar and blues to jazz, then to hip hop, then to techno, dubstep, all of the major American musics that have now become sort of the global subconscious come out of these kind of musical traditions from a history, not only based on tuning systems that one could argue the Greeks appropriated from North Africa, but the Greek sense of, if you think about anyone who plays music, I'm sure you know major chord, minor chord, a lot of hip hop's in what you call minor chord. Now, why is that? We can unpack that. There's a whole series of movements in Africa now called Afro beats, for example, where younger kids are looking at hip hop and then making more of an indigenous relationship to the continent. But diaspora is tricky. It's nonlinear. And from my perspective as a DJ who collects records, it's kind of like the DJ culture has inherited the Jali and or griot tradition, but with vinyl. And tonight, what we're kind of hearing here is a conversation across both cultures and geographies. So where he's playing a Kora, I'm playing a MacBook Pro, you know. And the fun part is these instruments can talk to one another. It's again, nonlinear history here. So this evening is kind of a celebration of that. And I do want to just point out really quickly that the projects that I'm doing are all online, and everything is what I call open source. So I'm a big fan of saying that history is kind of a collective situation. So regardless of the Google sponsored it, it's still free, don't worry about it. Bootleg culture, you know, this is the illegal mixtape. All right, so to riff one last time on what Yacouba was just saying, and then tying it to our contemporary experience, the North African traditions that I'm talking about, the Sahel, and then like looking at Mansa Musa, and then moving over to another Arabic term, Mansa Musa, amusingly enough, was at the crossroads of literally the whole North African and then Afro-diasporic tradition. But there's another term that lingers over our contemporary conversation, and that's the term algorithms. Now, an algorithm is basically an Arabic term, by the way, and I just want to show you really quickly the inventor of that. Whenever you think about your laptop, your cell phone, the frequencies that actually make the entire internet work, you can thank an Arab mathematician. Now, that Arab mathematician name was Al-Khwarizmi, but the Europeans didn't know how to pronounce his name, so it eventually became Algorithmi. And then you have Fibonacci in the 9th century, who wrote a book called Liber Abaci, which took both Arabic, and the Arabs had actually taken from Indian numeric systems. And next thing you know, the Europeans are like, oh, okay, we got 1, 2, 3. Those are actually Arabic numerals taken from Indian. But when you think about tuning systems, we still are dealing and grappling with this kind of cosmopolitan urge of the Mediterranean through the filter of the sub-Saharan African experience. So algorithm, it's an Arabic term, and it's a derivation of the term Al-Khwarizmi. So when I was thinking about the projects that I was doing for both Google and for my own work at Yale, I've been fascinated with sampling and collage. DJ culture is based on this idea of collage. You pull from records, you pull from different, you take, you know, George Clinton, remix it with James Brown or Bad Brains or whatever, and then next thing you know, you got Wu-Tang Clan, you know. So collage is a global vernacular right now, but it still comes out of the Afro-diasporic traditions. Now, I do want to just show one other thing, and then again, getting a little technical. if you think about 4/4 rhythm, a lot of people now call these ideas Euclidean rhythms. And Euclid was a Greek philosopher. Again, Mediterranean-wise, the Greeks were hanging out in Egypt. There was lots of different momentum going on between cultural exchange. And Euclid, again, it's kind of an early sensibility here. But there's a really good book I'd love to recommend, considering we're here at the library, by Ron Eglash, called African Fractals. Hang tight, yeah, Ron Eglash. And he wrote a book looking at African mathematic systems. Now, what's fascinating is why is most contemporary music in a 4/4 tempo? When you think about hip hop, techno, dubstep, all of the major musics of our time, we're in this straitjacket of tempo. And now, amusing enough and twistedly enough, we're in the middle of what some like Elizabeth Kohlberg from the New Yorker would call the 6th great extinction. The climate crisis has made it that species are dying literally every day. We're seeing a radical die-off. But we're also seeing a radical die-off of languages and rhythms. So one could argue that the human mirror of society versus nature is now basically in this radical decline because of the Anthropocene. But how do we put that into tempo, except for these kinds of conversations about the way we organize space with rhythm? So with that kind of said and done, we're going to do a quick kind of like collaborative situation here. I wanted to show you guys, here I'm going to do a quick remix, and he's going to riff over it. And then we're just going to kind of go back and forth a little bit, if that's okay. But if you haven't read Ron's book, it's called African Fractals. He looks at the core of modern computing and then kind of unpacks it from a West African diasporic. He's a very serious mathematician, by the way. This is pretty heavyweight stuff. I do feel like I did major in math, but I majored in macroeconomics, so totally useless degree. DJing's more fun. So with that said and done, if you can mute the laptop, I'm gonna put the headphones jack back on an older iPad that has a headphones jack still, by the way. You guys ready? Here, hope it's not gonna go crazy. All right, there we go. All right, so let's do a quick sound. I'm just gonna send you a quick sound so you have something. You want to do the beat first or the electronic one? The electronic one. Okay. So this, regretfully, is, I can't show you because I have multiple devices here. Bob Moog was an instrument maker, and he visited my studio years ago, and we stayed in touch before he passed away. Let me see if there's the internet has everything. It probably has him at my studio, I'm going to guess. Oh, it doesn't, okay. Well, anyway, he visited my studio. He was an inventor, very cool dude, very cool, interesting gentleman who changed the course of 20th century music. So what you're gonna see here, regretfully I can't show you, it's an app where we've taken most of the elements of his keyboard stuff. And I thought it'd be kind of a fun homage both to Sun Ra, who used Bob Moog's keyboards, and to Yacouba. And so this is going to be in C. I'll just do a C major kind of, okay. If you can bump the volume up. I mean, what you just heard is a conversation between both time periods, generations, and materials. So I just want to celebrate that. And all right, so we just did that, and now back to you.
I want to thank both of our guests for making my job so easy. And I also just wanted to point out another one of those African continuities that we have in American musical practice, especially African American musical practice, is improvisation. And it was just such a beautiful improvisation that we just witnessed. So thank you both for that, really.
And by the way, we just made this up on the spot.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
so
But they're really listening to each other as they're playing, and that conversation between the instruments, between the traditional and the contemporary, was just really beautiful to hear that unfold. So.
And by the way, there's an app for that. It's kind of wild because as a musician, so much of what we think about digital media and digital culture comes out of these instruments. And so I just always, whenever I hear these kind of tuning systems, I keep thinking, like, I want to sample that. Like, when you were playing, I was like, like, maybe we can do, you know, you heard it here first.
Yeah.
If bootleg remix on the internet coming up.
You need to do something together.
Definitely.
Make it a little bit more permanent for everyone.
We will.
So, do we have time for them to do another? Would you want to do another? Because I think they also were thinking about another piece.
Do you want to go first, or do you want to go back to the beat when we were playing? I played earlier.
Let me play one more song for them because they are so beautiful, and then we'll go back. Then remember, stop me if I was too, you know. Thank you.
We're not going to want to stop you.
Okay, well, before I start playing this, I want to tell you what this song is about. It's about a king like Mansa Musa in my country who always wanted to spend the money to give it to people and tell them no fight. Whatever you need, come to me. I have money, I will share with you. So it's very good message that Mansa Musa gave to us and to explore in the world, to tell the world about him. He said money is nothing. And Mansa Musa now is not in the world anymore, but we talk about him. What we have to do? We all need to do good. Help people. Helping people doesn't mean you have to give money to everybody, but you can help spiritually, mentally, physically. You know, that's everything accounts. So if you help anybody to success, to get out from their darkness of sorrow, you will be somebody and, you know, add it to the history. So enjoy this one. Thank you.
Okay. Let me see. I just want to make sure the sound is up. 1 second here. Okay. Okay. I'm sure we all know that sample. There we go. All right, so basically what I just did was play a little memory game. That's what sampling is. You play with the sound that people know, you go from there and then keep building. It's like a Lego blocks of an abstract kind of architecture. So what you were just hearing, I'm sure many of you know that song, you know, Fuck the Police by NWA. But from my perspective, the issue is more like when Eazy-E says, you know, you're now about to witness the strength of street knowledge. It's a kind of an incredible indictment of our system. But at the same time, all of those kinds of ancillary effects come in, the 4/4 tempo, the relentless 4/4 tempo, the minor chord approach. Those are things that linger over the global conversation, whether you're in India dealing with Bhangra, whether you're in Jamaica, Japan, China. This has now become the global vocabulary coming out of instruments such as that, where the kora, one could argue, has a deep relationship to the guitar. The guitar has a deep relationship to, obviously, blues, and keep going. But those come out of these political, ethnic, and above all, economic tensions of commerce and of diaspora. So, for example, the Moors in Spain, one could argue, influenced how we thought of the guitar. If you ever listen to Miles Davis's any of his albums about Spain, you can easily hear an echo of that. If you listen to John Coltrane, Interstellar, for example, is one of my favorite albums, you can also hear an echo of that. Alice Coltrane, and just keep going to people like Africa Bambaataa or Grandmaster Flash, and so on. So these are dots that we're kind of tonight connecting, and that's kind of what I think at least is the conversation. It's a dialectic. And to me, at least, if you go back to the Socratic kind of ideal, a good conversation can change minds. And that's kind of where I think the griot tradition that he embodies kind of, I think, lingers over the digital conversation. So let's play a beat. I'm just going to play them a quick thing just so they get a sense of what, here we go. Hopefully, did I pull the volume down? Nope, you should be hearing, interesting. Okay. Okay. All right. Okay. All right, so what I'm going to do is, and kind of what you're hearing right there is just from an iPad, by the way. I don't have my turntables because I would have had to set up an entire rig. But there's an app for everything, by the way. So what you're hearing here is basically I'm mirroring the instrument that I would be playing, which is a turntable. And we're going to make some beats out of this and kind of get a whole thing going here. All right, so you ready? Here we go.
beautiful. Thank you.
So, yeah, we just kind of, again, just made that up on the spot. This is a beat I just kind of just riffed on for a second. If you could just see, I just was calling up some files really quick and making small loops. He obviously, it's kind of a wild thing because the strings versus the digital, it's kind of like we both are going still to that archival relationship. And I'd love to, just kind of, when you hear hip hop, because I deal with a lot of styles, hip hop, techno, dubstep, et cetera, but the thing that keeps it all together is the 4/4. And to me, that's caused the extinction of other rhythms personally. Right now, we're seeing a tremendous global consolidation of rhythms. Do you have any thoughts on that? Like, I'd love to hear.
I mean, to me, everything is, with what you do with Kora, you can like either linked to hip hop. Right now I'm doing the things with the hip hop artists. At Carnegie Hall for Musical Explorer. We were just talking about, and every time I play, even if it's a slow, so we can speed up for them to sing, and they say hip hop come from Africa. I say I believe so because the traditional music is very deep. So at the point that you can get everything, pentatonic, diatonic, and even like a blues. So everything is in that, but you have to just work with the musician who knows those typical, because the music is rich there in Africa. How I learned, like I said, I didn't study music. I can't read. I can't really write music like with a signature key. So, but we do everything by ear. And everything I listen to it, and also if I touch my instrument to get the one note, like I mentioned to you, send the music, I listen to it, and if I have the key, one note on my core, I can play. So that's a great connection, but also because I try to create some kind of relationship between me and my instrument first. Because if you know your instrument, not only kora, any musical instrument, you have a relationship with your instrument, no music will be difficult to you. Because to me, music is a world language. You don't need to speak like I can play with the Chinese or I don't speak Chinese, but when, like I tell you about my mom, she could just, learn the language, but she doesn't even know what she's saying in the Korean language. But so music is like that. Everything goes together. They all linked somewhere. So if you want them to work together, of course they will. That's my opinion.
So, by the way, who makes the instruments? Because, I mean, for me at least, my instruments get made by like Apple or something,
Good question, brother. And because I didn't want to go too much because we have a lot to talk about, but I was going to quickly even tell them how kora was made. And you have a gourd, calabash, and cow skin. And we have a hardwood genu, and the strings are fishing line, as you see. But the very, very first, like you saw, that kora by my ancestor, the strings were antelope skin strings on the kora. But we have to learn how to make our own instrument, because I live here over 20 years, and there's no kora center like a guitar center in America. So you have to know how to really build your own instrument. So then I make my own instrument, and I make for all my students who are learning kora from me. So they buy it from me. It's very important for us to, because it's a shame to our family if you buy kora from somebody else and you don't know how to make your own instrument. It's not acceptable.
Uh-huh. Yeah. So what's incredible, isn't that, I mean, all right, here we are in a Western context. I doubt anybody in this room can make an iPad, just theoretically, I'm just saying. But none of us, we've been in a culture where most of us do not know the manufacturing process. For example, Stradivarius, when he's working on a violin, he had to get the wood from a very specific forest in his region, and that forest is actually under climate crisis, and they can't find the same wood anymore, by the way, because it's all been cut down. But this idea, this is a sustainable instrument. You're thinking about resilience. You're using all these kind of eco materials, which one could argue is a really, I think, incredible sense of resilience in the face of the climate crisis. Like most of my instruments, if the electricity goes off, you know, we'd have to have like everybody just playing a beat or something, like Fred Flintstone hip hop, you know, kind of. But it's like, you know, the electrical age that we live in, digital culture, most people do not know how to make anything. We might know how to use the software, but I doubt. There's certain artists like maybe Aphex Twin, if anybody remembers the ancient 90s, where, you know, he would make keyboards. Bob Moog, the gentleman I was playing earlier, he was an instrument maker. But this idea of tempos, of keys, and above all of diaspora, that's, I think, the glue that holds us together. Maureen, I was just going to say, I mean, obviously you come out of the rock, kind of the Black Rock Coalition, blues, rock. Do you have any maybe closing? I know we're going to wrap up and we're going to open up to questions too. Anybody have like maybe closing? Because as you can see.
Do we have time for questions, or where are we?
From the audience.
Yeah, fine.
Just, I mean, a really quick thought is where I started out with and listening to you all just now, the call and response and just certain kinds of continuities. I think the interesting thing is we're not always aware of where the things that we're using come from. But I think there's something about knowing those roots that's really valuable, and especially for African American musicians and artists, to understand like a sense of connection that they really have, or that we have, to this tradition. I wanted to ask Yacouba, how far back does your tradition go? It's hundreds and hundreds of years. And just to think about that, and you know, we're still doing it, we're still doing a form of it, and I think it's just a wonderful expression of the improvisation and the adaptability, even under tremendous duress, that we have this music now, and we can have this kind of conversation. So that would be my quick response. But is there a microphone for people?
Yeah, can I answer your question quickly? So my ancestor started doing, and especially the kora, is over 800 years. Since 13th century, we have a kora was played for the king. And I am around 70 generation of a kora player in the Jelly family, the Hughes family. So, which is something, and we have to pass to anybody who wanna learn kora, contact me.
And by the way, just as a quick counterpoint, I mean, I love hearing that he's got 70, like both my parents are professors, I'm the first generation DJ, so, you know.
That's good.
Yeah, so definitely remix, wow.
So we'll take questions from you. I see there's one in the back here.
Hi, thank you. First, quick shout out to Mali. It's the first African country that I visited, and I was there recently in March. And shout out to DC. I'm from New York, but I lived in DC for almost 4 years after I moved back from the continent. My first question is about the kora. So today with, apps and social media, how much do young people actually want to continue the tradition of playing the kora? And the DC question, and I'll pass my mic away, is DC Go-Go, did it have any type of influence on you? I lived in Shaw, by the way, so close to DuPont.
You want to go first?
You can go. I can close.
Okay, so Go-Go, for those who don't know, is basically an African polyrhythm situation with cool keyboards. And it had a science fictional sound. You had bands like Trouble Funk, Rare Essence. But then again, DC also had a punk scene like Minor Threat, Bad Brains. I grew up around that and dub. My mom was she was a main art critic for the Kingston Daily Gleaner in Jamaica, so we went to Jamaica every summer. So I got into kind of listening to sound systems in Kingston, Jamaica quite a bit. But my mom would take us to art and like kind of gallery stuff, and she would be like asking questions like, why don't women have pockets in their clothes? Like, design issues. And that would be like a family conversation, like we'd be at the dinner table, and my mom was like, why does women's clothing have no pockets? Like, let's talk about this.
It's an urgent question, I'll say.
This is before Lululemon with the tights, man. So, all I can say is, it's incredible to hear the question and think about DC as this kind of, George Clinton called it chocolate city. And so the White House was made by slaves. Georgetown University, made by slaves. Most major East Coast universities, made by slaves. Including the idea that if you played an instrument like this at a certain time, you would have your hands cut off because they wanted to brutalize you for getting rid of the traditions. So if you played African polyrhythm, your hands could be cut off. If you played a string instrument, your hand could be cut off. And this is going back, if you look up any history book, the brutality and industrialization of the slave experience and the Middle Passage created this new culture post-diaspora. So the fact that here we are in 2022 reaching across time and space and geography, it's an incredible thing. I mean, I firmly believe we're in a kind of kaleidoscope era where all of these different traditions, globally speaking, are just in this huge, I mean, personally, he could be also playing with K-pop. You know, I'm dead serious, by the way. You know, the K-pop guys, 4/4 tempo, hip hop, etc. You know, BTS should be sending us a royalty check. But how we think about art and diaspora, to go to the question, I'm just going to pass the mic, it's about that idea that there's a continuity in the incontinuity. Like we're just, the rupture and the break. Literally in hip hop it's called the break, break beat. So that's, at least from my philosophy, that's where we get to this notion of sampling as a different kind of vocabulary. And our vocabulary still has an eerie continuity across generations, diasporas, and so on.
Beautiful. Well, you know, kora is an instrument. You cannot learn first the kora without going through tradition, because the first pattern note we are giving to students is a typically traditional song, and which that song is a peacemaker song. We call it in Mandingo language from Gambia, Kele Faba. Kele means fighting, Faba, stopping. So you have to learn that song first. It's a traditional song to understand all the strings and localize your strings. So you can close your eyes, you can even pretend like you're falling asleep, but you know all your strings by heart. So to begin with that, you have to continue. Any kora player, if you don't go through that line, we won't consider you as a kora player. Yeah, exactly, because we have so many secrets into that. You have to learn first, and you can develop. Like myself, I mentioned in the beginning that I grew up listening to Western music, not the traditional, but I will play that, the traditional music, because my vision in the music was just not to be limited on traditional. As I came to America to live, I wanted just to experience myself with any musical style. So I want to do everything with the kora, because some people think kora can't do things with, but if you are the kora player and not lazy, you can learn everything. But I know some old generation still back home, they don't like the way we use a kora, but we have to also give a chance to people who have love for the kora to add the kora music on their music. So if you say, oh, I'm gonna just play traditional, it's not gonna work. So you have to learn how to, make everyone happy. Everybody can get a little bit from kora. Even though our ancestors are not happy, because even the kora changed. The kora looked like, you see the tuning peg on this kora with the clips, but it's helping me to understand much better chromatic skill. When I play with jazz, pop musician, like right now, the first song we played was on C major, and I needed E flat. So I don't have to tune back, I just put this down, I got E flat. So I learned that technique when I used to perform with the Regina Carter, or jazz musician, jazz violinist, and on the stage, all the keys different, sharp, flat, so they have to talk to give me time to push the letter, tuner. So it was taking so much, but this is much better. That's to answer your question. It doesn't affect us. We have to do anything, not only traditional. Thank you.
And she has a question here? Okay, they'll come back to you.
Hello. Thank you very much, both of you. This is very good. My name is Arnaud. I had a question for Spooky, actually. In the beginning, you mentioned something about in this new digital, super digital, data-driven age, that culture is becoming a lot more important. But you didn't really explain why, and I found it really interesting because I think about that a lot as well, and I'm curious to hear your perspective about why you think culture or music is becoming more important in this digital age, and what work you're doing in that space.
Okay, wow, that's a very meta question. All puns intended, Meta is the corporation that owns Facebook, by the way. So, yeah, let's call it meta-modern instead of postmodern here. So, all right, here we are in this room, in this time, where one could argue the invisible is far more powerful than the visible. For example, Trump would not have existed without Twitter. I'm just kind of putting it out there. And personally, at the moment, with this whole Kanye West anti-Semitic stuff, I don't know if anyone's following this, like, fuck Kanye at this point. But sorry, that's sacrilege in certain circles, but the anti-Semitic stuff is just not cool. That being aside, we have to think about collage, and the collage tradition comes out of everything from both Dada on one hand and the fine arts. If you go back to the 1915s, you had the Italian futurists, you had all sorts of people trying to critique how technology was shaping culture. But meanwhile, if you think about West Africa, so one of my all-time favorite science fiction writers is a woman by the name of Octavia Butler. And, oh, okay. We got some science fiction people, all right. Well, the world definitely is very science fictional at this point. And like whether you're flying drones over Ukraine or if you're in the middle of like uploading a TikTok, we are all tied to this algorithmic perspective right now. So culture, personally, is the operating system. And the funny thing is how regretfully, we've seen these platforms, whether it be Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and so on, they are monetizing the attention economy. We're moving out of the production of physical goods to the notion of digital perspectives. And I think that's where the bulk of most people, the billionaire class right now, most of their money comes out of that. That's, again, my personal take. There's economists who talk about this, et cetera. But the role of culture in that is how do we think about reclaiming this territory away from the sort of the corporate colonization of the subconscious. I mean, personally, that's like Twitter is this huge toilet that just somehow is like, and by the way, I'm doing a social media detox at the moment. I'm not looking at Twitter, but if you tweet at me, I'll look at it maybe next year. But how people think about the subconscious, I'm fascinated with right now because like Trump gave people permission to be their worst self. Sorry to keep riffing on Trump, but the elections are coming up. By the way, please vote, please. November, what is it, 11th? 8th. Definitely, we got it. Just there's so many issues right now. But yeah, culture, it's kind of wild because when I thought about the last maybe 20 years at the beginning of the 21st century, and I'll just pass the mic back here, is that we tried to figure out the monetization of these issues. And if you think about everything from Steve Jobs, for example, naming his record label Apple after the Beatles' record label, Apple Records, on over to Zuckerberg and so on, all these guys come out of, one could argue, a music-adjacent approach to things. But the hype was based on the way that they monetize people's attention. Apple is not just physical objects, it's mostly the software and the cultural ideology that goes with their devices. So too with Samsung or Huawei or any of the major digital media culture producers. So it's a strange moment because I think that personally, I'd love to tell everyone, maybe this would be a t-shirt. Again, you heard it here first, like delete yourself, like just take it and shut it all down. But that's not going to happen. People they're deeply enmeshed in these, regretfully, very corporate ideological spaces. So the role of culture, I'm a big fan of Theodore Adorno. If anyone hasn't read his work, he's really interesting. He coined the term the culture industry. These are all things that we're in the middle of. I mean, it's no question that, for example, one of the most important incidents in the world right now is the climate crisis. But it's a place where hyper-consumerism has led us to over-consume at every level, and we're still in this fossil fuel-based economy, and how do we get out of that? But there's a famous phrase, regretfully, from a Saudi minister of oil, where he says, the Stone Age didn't end for lack of stone, it ended because people had better ideas. So we're kind of the edge of this sort of oil age, stone age. That's kind of my take on it. So, sorry if that was a long response.
Do we have time for one more?
One, possibly two more.
One more, okay.
Thank you. I just wanted to really thank you for taking me on a memory lane, because the very first person that I met that didn't look like me was from Mali. He was from Bamako. His name was Mamadi, and he studied in Poland, where I'm from. So that was beautiful, because Mamadi, together with his roommate Mamadou from Senegal, they introduced me to this amazing culture, and I ended up actually studying African culture at Warsaw University at one point. So, and learned a little bit of Swahili, which is not useful in West Africa. Not at all. So I have a quick question, very simple question, and a little longer question. So the first one is, I'm really curious how many strings are there?
Kora has a 21 strings.
21?
Yeah.
Okay, that's a lot.
And you only play with 4 fingers, 2 thumbs and 2 index.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
And a little longer question. So because of the era of this enormous, social media, internet, and technology, I think there's such a great opportunity to show this kind of collaborations, to really tap into what we have something to cherish, and what we can look for the connectivity between different cultures and different, backgrounds and stuff like that. So like how we can actually help to spread this word around, because you can do it yourself. I think a lot of people needs to be immersed into it so we can all connect it. And how put this in a Google search that it pops out first, instead of Fendi bag, for example.
Wow, okay. I can't speak for Google's algorithms, but I do think that the dialogue with Yacouba is going back to some of the issues. I major in philosophy, and I remember doing my senior honors thesis on Ludwig Feuerbach and the rise of humanism, which is why I ended up being a DJ, by the way, because I was super boring. But the idea here is that, you know what, if you're from Poland, I've DJed in Warsaw and Gdansk. I'm never sure if I'm pronouncing it right. And there's a big club in Warsaw that was the gift of, I'm using air quotes there, the gift of Stalin. It's like a big cultural hall. Yeah, the palace, yeah. Downstairs is a big club. Yeah, I've DJed there. Oh, Herbie Hancock played there too, right, there we go. It's a cool club for Warsaw. If anyone happens to be there, it's a cool club.
It's actually so anti-socialism right now. Everything what is there, gay film festival, everything that would be against what was the propaganda.
Right, Stalin, yeah.
That's the symbol of it right now.
Right, so I was sort of the anti-Stalin DJ mix. But, so, I mean, these are issues that people are going to be grappling with as this century unfolds. And I firmly believe the conversation is that if we can see one thing, there's a huge rise of authoritarianism. If you look at Bolsonaro in Brazil, if you look at Duterte now, I couldn't believe anybody would vote Marcos back in, Marcos in the Philippines. Of course, the US, with the elections coming up, the control of women's bodies, et cetera, the list goes on and on and on. But how authoritarianism, it's, again, Orwell, was kind of right on certain levels, like he who controls the past controls the future, he who controls the present controls the past. And this is a kind of a music as an anti-Orwellian dialectic, where memories and culture, when he's telling a story, the village or the people will gather and listen for days, right? I mean, they'll hear their history, their story, whereas for me, I make a DJ mix that people might put on YouTube and listen to for days, so you never know. But eerily enough, there's, regretfully, from my perspective as a digital media artist, is that most of my tools are digital. I mean, I have ideas, I have concepts. And luckily, I studied music as well, so I also can write music and I can do all that. But when I hear him play, I play upright bass, which he blows me away. I mean, there's no question. He's like a master musician. I'm like, I can sample that? So get ready. But basically, when you look at Grandmaster Flash, when you look at Africa Bambaataa, the 70s, New York was in an urban crisis. There's a famous newspaper says, President Ford says New York dropped dead. New York was bombed out, South Bronx. You had Jamaicans listening to sound systems. You had African-American kids. Everybody was just hanging out in the park, and you had this huge collage. And that's, I think, we're just now sort of grappling with that. It's going to get deeper, trust me. I mean, when I saw the rise of BTS and the K-pop stuff, that's globally become wildly, hugely popular. But it's still, again, hip-hop, 4/4 tempo, and so on and so on. And this is, I think the 4/4 tempo thing is probably the hidden stealth, like why? Like there's people, psychologists, mathematicians, quantum physicists, you name it, like with Neil deGrasse Tyson type stuff, where people are trying to figure out why the African American locked to 4/4 tempo. It just seems like it's really, I mean, West African music, a lot of it's like 6/8 tempo. So when I hear the 6/8, I'm like, it's like boom, da, boom, you know, it's kind of a whole different like swing to it. But when you hear that just straight up like if you guys walk through Prospect Park, I'm sure somebody has a sound system someplace. And they'll probably have a barbecue too, come to think of it. But he could still sit in with that. Like, you know, so that vocabulary is now the global subconscious, at least. And I hope that answers your question. It's tricky because I do think that as we move further into the 21st century, you're seeing a radical fragmentation of culture along ethnic power. You know, like in China, for example, they have their own world because of the great firewall of China where they can filter and edit and censor. But if you look at the protests in Iran, for example, the women are all making music and doing all sorts of really interesting uploads of video about the protests. In fact, the government, the first they're trying to do is shut down the internet. It's kind of just surreal to see how politics, art, culture, and revolution happen. Like, I think in the Sahel right now, how many revolutions have happened in the last, like, I think most major countries have had a revolution in the last maybe 10 years? They all are going through turbulence, and it's because the young people are beginning to have cell phones, be able to communicate, be able to say we want a different thing. And it's going to get deeper. And I just say this is the beginning.
So I just had a thought that's a much more kind of maybe on the ground and on these specific grounds response to your question, and it has to do with when you're talking about making connections, how might we make these connections? And I think one of the things is, you know, to take advantages of opportunities. This is such a wonderful opportunity tonight, to take advantage of opportunities to learn about these other places and other cultures. And I just want to put in a word for the vinyl collection here at the library, where they've just done some I think you maybe saw the albums as you were coming in. You can, if you have a Brooklyn Public Library card, you can check out this music and travel to Mali with the record player. There are record players upstairs in when you come in the doors to the right, there's some turntables set up. But I think just, you know, thinking beyond, getting outside of those cycles of what I think of as, I'm sorry, it's just bad news. And I think one of the powers, not to sound Pollyanna-ish, but one of the powers of the music is to get on a different plane and to learn about culture from a different perspective. And so we have that right here. As you know, librarians really want you to use the library and check things out. So I would encourage everyone to take advantage of the material, all of the materials that are here. And we're thinking about the libraries on the edges of the desert, and the libraries that the families like Yacouba's carry in their minds and their bodies, the archives that they hold. And then we have, you know, right here on Grand Army Plaza and throughout Brooklyn, these wonderful libraries that we can access. So I would just encourage us all to take advantage of that.
And tiny follow-up. I'm going to do a mix for the library. I just got crazy busy, and I'm going to have to upload it. But we're going to do a whole thing about being able to check out some of the records from the playlist. Give me a second on that. But we should probably do some selections too. I think we're gonna, that'll be part 2. So join us online at the library's website in like a week or so. Time is a scarce resource. Last?
I want to say thank you so much to all of you. Yacouba's band Sia, again, will be playing on November 13th in this room for free at 4 o'clock. Please join us again there. Maybe, Paul, you can come out and step in from the audience. But Thank you to Paul Miller. Thank you, Maureen Mann. Thank you, Yacouba Sissoko, for a really fascinating conversation.